Welcome back. The 17th G20 summit in Bali has concluded. G20 leaders visited a forest in Bali to plant mangrove trees in a message of unity for climate action. Member nations also made a declaration to boost trade ties and anti-terror cooperation with India's diplomatic clout on display. As India takes over the presidency of the multilateral forum, Prime Minister Narendra Modi set the tone with the message, one earth, one family, one future.
G20 की अध्यक्षता का दायित्व इस पवित्र द्वीप बाली में ग्रहण कर रहे हैं। विश्व जियोपॉलिटिकल तनावों, आर्थिक मंदी, खाद्यान्न और ऊर्जा की बढ़ी हुई कीमतों और महामारी के दीर्घकालीन दुष्प्रभावों से एक साथ जूझ रहा है। भारत की G20 अध्यक्षता इंक्लूसिव, एम्बिशियस, डिसिसिव और एक्शन ओरिएंटेड होगी। नए विचारों की परिकल्पना के लिए और सामूहिक एक्शन को गति देने के लिए एक ग्लोबल प्राइम मूवर की तरह काम करे। भारत की G20 अध्यक्षता की थीम वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर में पूर्ण रूप से समाहित है।
But amidst the G20 meeting, for the first time since the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a NATO member has been hit. A Russian-made missile strayed into Poland and killed 2 Polish citizens. After initial alarm, both the US and NATO have said that this is likely a Ukrainian missile fired in self-defense, which hit Poland by mistake. But how real is the threat of escalation? This is a CNN News 18 special report.
It's the first confirmed case of the war in Ukraine having caused casualties in another country. This one was not on Ukrainian territory, where there's been a spurt in Russian missile strikes over the last 24 hours. Media reports said 2 Polish citizens were killed as a missile landed in a village in eastern Poland, 4 miles from the country's border with Ukraine. The Polish president came out to say that there's no sign yet that the hit was an intentional attack. Investigations continue. Not just another missile strike, because this one was in NATO territory. And the hit holds massive consequences arising out of what is potentially a vicious escalation of the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
An attack on all allies in that principle of collective defense. But there are indications emerging now that the US may be stepping back and taking NATO back from potentially a devastating confrontation directly on the ground with Russian forces.
As alarm buttons were pushed in Warsaw, tremors were felt at the G20 summit in Indonesia. G7 and NATO leaders got into a huddle as US President Joe Biden called an emergency meeting. Biden underscored support for Ukraine, even as he expressed strong doubts on the missile in Poland coming from Russia.
There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say that till we completely investigate, but it's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia, but we'll see.
The Polish Foreign Ministry identified the missile as being made in Russia, but the Polish president was more cautious about its origin, saying that officials did not know for sure who fired it or when it was made. Russia rejects any hand in firing a missile into Poland. The Ukraine sees reason to claim Russia's deliberate bid to escalate the conflict.
Hitting missiles on NATO territory. This is Russian missile attack on collective security. This is a very significant escalation. We must act, and I want to say now to all our Polish brothers and sisters, Ukraine will support you. Terror will not break free people. Victory is possible when there is no fear. You and I don't have it.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg called an emergency meeting of the alliance's envoys to discuss the events close to the Ukrainian border in Ukraine.
We have no indication that this was the result of a deliberate attack. and we have no indication that Russia is preparing offensive military actions against NATO.
It boils down to one factor. Where did the missile that hit Przewodow village in NATO member Poland come from? Theories raised range from it being a Russia missile fired into Ukraine, crossing over into Poland, or even that it was a Ukrainian warhead to counter Russia. All eyes on a definitive statement as mind-boggling fallouts are calculated.
Joining me now, Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at ORF, and Dr. Sergey is President of IDC Russia and Director WHD International Board. Mr. Sareen, I'm coming to you. The Indian delegation played a big role in achieving consensus among member states over the wording criticizing the Russian invasion. The draft, in fact, echoes Prime Minister Narendra Modi's words to Vladimir Putin in Samarkand in September. Would you say that it has come to a point where India's position and stand is being heard by the world? The Prime Minister's words, of course, were, "Now is not the time for war."
You know, I think what the Prime Minister said was unexceptionable. I don't think anybody can really say that there was any problem in what the Prime Minister said. I don't think even the Russian president would have taken it as something out of the ordinary. In fact, he kind of agreed with the Prime Minister. But that position is very well taken. But what happened in the G20 was, some decent diplomacy from the Indian side to try and get some kind of a consensus, because there were some countries which did not want an outright condemnation of Russia. That does not mean that they support the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It does not mean that they support the war, but it means that they feel that, a condemnation on a public platform is not very helpful from the point of view of diplomacy, if at all diplomacy has to play a role in trying to stop the war. So I think a kind of a middle ground was found, where it was said that the formulation was that most of the countries kind of condemn Russia, but then, it's something like what happens in the SCO, that India does not agree with the BRI project of the Chinese. All other countries are ready to go with it. So they take out India from that thing, and the communique goes ahead. And I think something similar has happened this time around. So that is where matters stand. How helpful it will be in actually bringing the war to an end is another matter altogether.
That's right. And Dr. Sergey, the developments that have happened in Poland, which has the world concerned, I mean, was this just an accident, or was there more to it? How is Russia viewing it? Was it just by mistake in self-defense, as NATO members are looking at it?
First of all, we understand that the current situation with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, because Russia start with a space operation to protect Russian-speaking population of the eastern part of Ukraine. And as you know, that sometimes we cannot tell what is a mistake or how it was happened. But of course, it should be make some research about the situation, and after some
the
deep
US
research,
is saying that it is unlikely that it is Russia. They are looking at the facts. There are multiple versions that are coming in. Poland has said that it was an unfortunate accident, not an international attack. Then if this is the version that is coming from the ground, particularly Poland, who has lost, which has lost, in fact, 2 of its nationals, then do you think the war will escalate in that direction, or are you of the opinion that this was just, Ukrainian missile fired in self-defense, which hit Poland by mistake?
I can see that if we look smartly to this situation, we can understand that we have some players, international players on the current field, diplomatic field, and the geopolitical field. They are very interesting to escalate this conflict. Even Western countries, they're looking for all possibilities to blame our country and to make some bad image about our country. That's why I will be very careful with this situation, and that's why I can tell that it should be some deep research and some confirmation why it was happened. And in my opinion, we should be more peaceful and more smart and open to dialogue and to see what was behind this situation and who is most beneficial for this situation.
Okay, so Shansarin, I'm going to go back to G20 because, India has taken over the presidency now. Prime Minister Modi termed India as the global leader in financial inclusion and how India accounted for 40% of the world's real-time payment transactions, as well as used the COVID platform to carry out the world's biggest vaccination exercise against COVID. So when you look at the nature of the entire assertion that has come from the Prime Minister, many are seeing this as India's moment, and particularly coming at a time when we have taken over the chairmanship of G20.
Yeah, it in a way it is India's moment. I think that's undeniable because the G20 is the 20 most powerful economic players in the world. And if you are the president of the G20 for this year, then it's an opportunity both for you to showcase yourself and your country, as well as to try and push the agenda forward, especially the kind of agenda which the Prime Minister has. He's talking about data for all, he's talking about inclusion, financial inclusion. But I think ultimately the test of the Indian presidency will be whether we can actually do something over what the Prime Minister said, that one, there is this looming global economic recession, and can India spearhead the G20's efforts to stabilize the global economy? And I don't say that, we have some kind of a magic wand, but at least try and give some kind of a direction to that so that this problem is sorted out or at least mitigated to the extent possible. And then, of course, there are the other considerations, the geopolitical tensions and, the climate change and all of that. Some of those are linked with, the economic recession, which is looming large. And some of those are going to be are exacerbating the economic recession. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war. But Maria, if you'll allow me just a sentence or two on what has happened, in Poland. I think, of course, investigation needs to be done, but just look at the kind of posturing which is being done by the three main players. The Russians are flatly denying that they had anything to do with that particular missile attack, right? Yes. The NATO and the West are being very, very cautious because they understand that if indeed this was a Russian missile which was fired into Poland, then you might just be looking at a much wider war, which nobody wants. I think NATO and the West is quite happy to see the Ukrainians fight the Russians. They'll keep supplying the Ukrainians. So it's, in a manner of speaking, a low-cost kind of a thing as far as they are concerned. But I think it's the Ukrainians, maybe I'm being a little cynical out here. Right from the time when the war started, President Zelensky has been trying to rope in NATO and the US and the other European countries into the war to fight on his behalf. He has been asking them to give him the air cover, which would have pitted them directly against the Russians and would have led to a wider war. So he has been actually pushing for it. And after yesterday's incident, while the NATO and the Americans and everybody else was playing it down, they were trying to calm things down, going into an investigation, Mr. Zelensky was actually pushing for everybody else to step into this war so that it becomes a wider war.
Okay.
I think somebody needs to tell Mr. Zelensky to lay off. Nobody wants a wider war. Nobody wants a third world war, certainly not in Europe, certainly not in Asia, because its destructive impact is going to be all across the globe. So I think one understands where Zelensky is coming from, but that does not mean that, you try and provoke everybody into some kind of a third world war. And which is why, questions are also being raised, or at least
On
doubts
his
are being
reaction.
expressed, whether this was some kind of a false flag attack
Right.
to provoke a wider war.
All right. So, Shansarin and Dr. Sergey, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And our last international story on this bulletin, the race for the White House 2024 with former U.S. President Donald Trump throwing his hat in the ring, while Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis is being seen as a potential challenger. I'm leaving you with this. I'll be seeing you tomorrow. Thanks so much.
America's comeback starts right now.
Former President Donald Trump announcing another bid for the presidency.
2 years ago, we were a great nation, and soon we will be a great nation again.
The twice impeached former president is aiming to be only the second commander-in-chief ever elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. Trump making the long-anticipated announcement in the wake of election losses from several of his endorsed candidates.
Much criticism is being placed on the fact that the Republican Party should have done better, and frankly, much of this blame is correct. But the citizens of our country have not yet realized the full extent and gravity of the pain our nation is going through, and the total effect of the suffering is just starting to take hold. They don't quite feel it yet, but they will very soon.
Given the GOP's midterm losses, some Republicans are wary of another Trump presidential bid. It is widely expected he'll face primary challengers. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is seen as one possible contender to challenge the former president.
We just tell people to go check out the scoreboard from last Tuesday night. It was a hugely underwhelming, disappointing performance.
Another potential contender is his former vice president, Mike Pence.
I think we'll have better choices in the future.
President Biden, who has yet to announce whether he will seek re-election, tweeted after the announcement, quote, "Donald Trump failed America."
I believe I can beat Donald Trump again.
Trump's desire to announce his campaign early coming after the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, which advisors say further emboldened his decision to mount what he believes will be a triumphant political comeback. Trump is the subject of a bevy of lawsuits and federal investigations, including his possible involvement in the January 6th Capitol attack. Trump is fighting a subpoena issued by the House Select Committee investigating January 6th over providing documents and testimony to the committee.